All right, so I believe that where we were before the break is that we did reach agreement on the second part of the meeting, that there would be some amount of time or speakers allocated to each of the two groups, the speakers chosen by the planning board and the speakers chosen by the appellants. And there was a suggestion that it would be difficult to know how long a time to spend without some discussion. So we've had a break. Both groups have hopefully thought about how much time they think is appropriate. And I guess if you all agree that's where we are, then I'd ask one of the two groups of you to say how much time you think is appropriate.
Go, Dan.
Okay, the reason that time frame, Barbara's recommended an hour for each side instead of 45 minutes, but I threw in an extra 30 minutes, giving each speaker 5 minutes for whatever. So that in essence, we're saying the same thing, because you divide that 30 minutes by 15 minutes to each one, and then it just means each side 1 hour. It depends on how fast they set up and want to get going or how they want to do it. So again,
so your group of appellants has thought about it and believes that 1 hour for each group would be appropriate.
and that would include, then you're
that includes any
to,
time for setup or bad luck of computers crashing or any of those things. That's all part of the hour.
we have a public there, and they're,
Okay. And did the planning board members have a chance to consider this question?
Well, I think we continue to focus more on what we think the topics that we covered are, and less really on the number of time. But and actually, I'd just like to caveat by saying we thought we'd be spending 3 hours talking about the format today, not 10 minutes after our restroom break. So anyway, this is the best we can do in 10 minutes. We actually think there's two distinct subjects, the housing and transportation, so it would probably take 2 different meetings to cover adequately. Under housing, we think we should be talking about both the history of Measure A and then Measure A as it's applied in the city now. So how it affects particular development projects, how it is looked at by the city attorney and staff, either current staff or former staff, whoever will need to speak to that issue, and how it impacts the decisions that are being made and on the ground in reality. We think it's important to talk about the diversity of how it affects diversity of housing types and income, because there's something in the housing element that talks about how we should have diversity in our housing. We also think that we need to be addressing neighborhood development, because both in the recent poll, I think that was just in the paper, but also in the housing element, talks about wanting to replicate the type of neighborhoods we have now that have markets that you can walk to, other convenience services, little restaurants, and so you have to have kind of a sustainable amount of housing to sustain those small businesses and the type of historic pattern that Alameda had. And then the questions of sort of what is it to have a sustainable, livable community where people can walk, where at the forum that you were at with Helen, one of the issues that came up was the types of projects that people like the townhomes over at Marina Village, or something like right, so we looked at a triplex, but are those kind of projects doable under Measure A without the triplexes?
so what I showed were the Measure A compliant projects.
Yeah, there was a discussion, among the public about, that question, and so how do you create, walkable communities? And then maybe we should end with a discussion of how do other cities use growth control measures to achieve the same objectives that Alameda wants to achieve, which are, walkable cities, small neighborhoods, transit-oriented development, so that we can compare what we're doing with what other communities are doing and decide, should we do it better or not? Is Measure A the best way for us to do it or another way? So that's kind of the housing, 5 minutes on that. The other 5 minutes we talked about what a transportation-related topic would be, and that would include, how does Measure A affect traffic and transportation on the island? What alternative development patterns are happening in other communities to either better sustain transit or not? What can we learn from other communities? And then also how best to create a community with its jobs and housing balance, so that you actually really limit the number of times people get in their cars or even move across or off the island. So those are the sort of topics under the sort of second. And that's as far as we got in the 10 minutes we had as opposed to.
Well, I think we agreed. How long do you want? I think we agreed before the break, I'm sorry to say, that we would come back with a sense of how long this part 2 in that forum would be. And I'm hoping that one of the 3 of you might have an answer to that question.
Well, this was a proposal on the table. I don't
Well, I guess I'm going to have to ask us to go back and look at this. I do think that maybe this is my misunderstanding, but I did think that at your last meeting you agreed to a format of a first part with at least Woody and other things to talk about facts. And I know you all, the three planning board members, have suggested it might be more than Woody, but I thought you agreed that you would have a first part to talk about facts, a second part with presentations by various folks, which you now today agreed will be split between the two sides, and that you had already agreed, even at the end of your last meeting, that there'd be a third part of some form of public input.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm hearing now the three planning board members say that you're not sure you've agreed to this three-part meeting.
No, I'm sorry, I need to further explain. So I was sort of focused on, the two forums. So within that context, yes, there would be sort of a time for a panel or speakers or whatever to discuss among themselves these topics, maybe have questions
Is
by
that my
the
number
public.
one or my number two?
I think you're number two.
Okay.
And,
And you agree that there is also a number one with at least Woody in it? And you're suggesting perhaps someone else, but I'm trying to figure out what we have agreement on.
And
We
I
have
think-
agreement that there's a part one
Yes.
about facts that's at least Woody.
Yes.
All six of you agree on that?
yes.
I'm sorry, Pat, I just want to...
Yes, I agree with
Okay,
that.
but let's please, can we just move along?
Well,
This
that's
will
my
help
point.
us. Number
What's
two, do
help
we all
us?
agree that there's a second part that will have some allotment of time and/or speakers that's going to be split into two sides? Have we all agreed on that?
We did.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Rebecca, you agreed on that?
Well, I think that's what we're trying to discuss right now, is what the format of that.
You mean you're not?
But have we agreed that there is a part two that has equal time and speaker and/or speakers among the two different sides? Have we at least agreed to that? I hear that being reopened as a question, and maybe it's just me mishearing.
I thought we broke for that reason, to find out.
One on the housing element, one on transportation.
Okay, and I'm going to hold aside this question of a transportation forum for a minute. We're talking about a forum right now, and I thought we agreed, and I'm not sure if we're losing this agreement or if I misunderstood or if we're not, or if I did understand. I thought we agreed on at least a forum with three parts. A first part on facts, including at least Woody, a second part on presentations, which we've agreed today is split between two sides, and a third part of public input. Have we, all six of you, agreed to that?
Yes.
I feel like we're losing that agreement, and I feel like that this is just not going in the direction that I thought it was going to go in. And I understand that we did have a certain agreement from the last meeting, but I think more than just agreeing to say, oh, gosh, no, just listen
Barbara,
to me
please,
for
let's
a
let
minute.
Rebecca finish.
No, I mean, once we agree,
Barbara, please, let's let
stop.
Rebecca finish, and please treat each other with respect while other people are speaking.
I think we should just perhaps step back and, as you said, your recommendation was to let the appellants recommend speakers, and we would recommend speakers. I think maybe we take one step back from that and say, you can recommend this sort of forum, but I don't think we can, at least I can't, embrace where we continue to go with this. I just can't do it, and so perhaps it's going to end up just well, I think that's what Ann is presenting, that perhaps it's two forums, one dealing with housing, one with transportation, and that we make that recommendation to the planning board, and then the appellants make their recommendation to the planning board and let it go from there, because I feel like because there's so, maybe there's a little movement on either side, frankly, as to where we should go with that, and maybe this forum was set up so it became so very difficult to ever reach a consensus, but I think that may be where we
So
end
you're
up.
feeling at this point, Rebecca, that it may have been that we were moving towards agreement to do a forum with a 1, 2, and 3 parts, but at this point you're needing to move back from that agreement that we're moving toward. Okay. I think, I'm sorry, I know a lot of you would probably like to speak to that. I think this may be a right junction. Kathy and I spoke a little bit at the break about, because a couple people said we're not sure if this is one forum or several, and actually one of the members of the audience came up and asked about that. It's been my understanding that the directive from the city council was that this committee was to plan a forum. And I know that when, I don't think that the council necessarily said when we say a forum, we mean one forum, but certainly the way one interprets the English language would be a forum means one. Kathy, I think, can speak to this further. I think she's indicated there may be resource issues in terms of trying to plan more than one forum. Do you want to talk about
Well,
that?
the direction was always one forum, and the city council's direction was a forum to discuss Measure A in the context of the housing element and transportation. It's one workshop or one forum, however you.
No, you left out a couple of words.
And then, well, and it was to discuss the.
Forum
Can I finish?
Measure A,
Kathy's really
But
trying to address the
please
question of is it
finish.
one or several?
And
she's correct.
And then beyond that, it was to talk about the facts, the benefits, and limitations of Measure A in the context of the housing element and transportation.
Mhm.
I've got the minutes, it's in here.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's it. It's one forum, guys. That's what
But
we're
so, and my understanding is the city doesn't really have the resources to run more than one forum.
Well, no, the housing element is the way we're funding this.
The housing element can fund one forum.
Right.
So there's both that, I think, I mean, the way I summarize that is to say that both the city council direction has had the words a forum in it, not a forum or forums, and the housing element process can only afford one forum. So certainly the committee can choose to do as it likes, and there could be minority or split reports, but I think what you're hearing from Kathy at least is that it's unlikely it's going to be more than one forum, at least from staff's perspective. Pat?
I think if we can't come to an agreement, I, for one, would like to make a motion that we return to the city council and ask for further direction. Because I see this as going nowhere, that we're going backwards, that we've already come up with an agreement, and now some members want to back away from the agreement. And I think then that we need better direction in following their directive, because I see this as a total waste of time if, in fact, we have an agreement from meeting A, and now here meeting B, we don't have an agreement again. So I thought we agreed when we broke, we were going to go out and we were going to agree that we were going to come up with a time frame in which we would present the history, our position on Measure A, they present their position on Measure A, within all of these things you talked about, Ann. And if you need 2 hours to do that, then I thought that's what you were going to come back with, that you need 2 hours within this form to present the issues that you're talking about. I don't see the problem here. But if we can't come to an agreement with this, then I personally would like to seek further guidance from the city council, because I think this is a waste of time otherwise.
I believe the directive from the city council was to report back to the planning board.
That's absolutely
You're
true.
making a recommendation
Make
to
a
the planning
recommendation to
board
the planning
on
board.
a
I think if you were to find that your committee is unable to make a recommendation to the planning board, you could do any number of other things. And I think Pat is saying that you may be at a point where you're unable to make a recommendation to the
Well,
planning board.
we're
But
already on parallel tracks. I mean, that's a fair statement, I think. So.
that's your statement. I wouldn't. I think you've agreed that I thought you had agreed that this one part of the meeting would have two parallel tracks. Let's let Marilyn finish, and then Barbara will be
Yeah,
next.
well, before you let Aaron.
Well, no, Marilyn.
No, I'm just saying, I think the three of us are probably ready to make our recommendation back to the planning board right now.
Yeah.
Barbara.
They obviously have developed a strategy in their little closed session, was that we don't like it. We agreed to this meeting, but we're unhappy about the agreements that were made, not only at the last meeting, but at this one. And at this meeting, once again, it was affirmed that each side would pick its own speakers. And that was agreed on at this meeting. Now they decided, well, we don't like this. They're like little children who have their candy taken away from them. So they figure since they've got a 6-1 vote on the planning board, they'll take it back to the planning board. Well, maybe some kind of news for you. The minute the planning board makes a decision, we appeal it back to the city council. So it's going back to the city council if you can't work with us today.
Yeah, you said your strategy.
No, that's your strategy.
That's your strategy.
I would like to go back to this, what you have up here, and also go back to what we agreed at the last meeting.
Okay.
What we agreed at the last meeting was that there would be, would you mind, it would be one speaker, there would be others.
I don't think I think it's an open question, but I
Whether
don't.
there would be others than just Woody Minor?
Right, I don't think
No,
we would agree on that.
Oh, that's
I
good.
think
We
there
agreed
was.
that we would solicit input from the public about other possibilities.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you meant for part one.
No, I'm
Part-
talking about in the
I think,
in the broadest
okay.
sense.
We agree there would be Woody Minor,
speaker.
and that we would solicit some additional speakers on general topics, yes.
Right, on general topics, which we've done.
Yes,
And we also agreed that there would be a public input component.
yes.
I don't think that we agreed that there would be 1, 2, or 3 necessarily.
I certainly thought we did, but maybe that was a good
Okay, well,
interpretation.
that's fine, I mean, we can even still look at that. So I think, in my mind, I didn't hear the city council saying that there would only be, one meeting. But if that's people's consensus, then maybe we just need to figure out whether we think that's a 12-hour meeting then. In order to accomplish the discussions that we think needs to happen.
Something that we don't even got a chance to raise last time is that sometimes it's good to have meetings at 2 different times because different people are able to come. Like a meeting today really is not conducive, but it's not really meant to be a public forum. Saturday morning, afternoon, what have you, works for some, not necessarily families with young children who have a myriad of activities to get to. So and Kathy, I understand the funding constraints, and I appreciate that you've even made facilitator available and all this as far as we've gone. But perhaps it's semantics again that we could start it on an evening with what I think might be the shorter of the 2 topics would be the transportation, continue it to a weekend day for the housing element seems to me, this is my one opinion, but maybe the meatier, lengthier issue.
Well, just taking off what she said, it seems to be that perhaps the difference is we are advocating for a structure around a topic and that it be transportation and housing. And that within that we find a framework of work. And perhaps this one is more saying we have a time frame within which to work and each the appellants and the planning board are making recommendations on speakers and they can speak on whatever they want. That seems to be where parting ways. If we can get beyond that, that's great. If we let's talk and see if we can get beyond that, but I'm not sure we can.
Pat?
I think you kind of misunderstood. It's not saying that they can talk about anything they want. It's that they can talk about anything that has to do within the mission statement. Now, Ann's list, and I can, here's my housing element. You see all my tabs in this housing element? These are all the things that talk about the good things that Measure A does within the housing element. Now, I could spend 3 hours on this in talking and educating you about this. Now, my memory is that when Ann was sitting at a planning board meeting, and the way this whole thing happened, is Ann said the public needs to be educated about what Measure A is and what it's all about, that a lot of people don't understand it. So my view is this forum is an educational opportunity. It's not a political opportunity, nor is it an opportunity to advocate any one position. It is the position of what Measure A has done historically and how it affects the community today. So to say that your speaker can speak about anything, well, in this context. So I don't understand your objection. If you guys say you need 6 hours, then fine. You need 6 hours and we'll address that. But to come back and say after you have agreed you're going to go out and have your little caucus and you're going to agree how much time you need, to come back and say now you want to change the whole thing. First off, it's very disrespectful to everybody's time because we've already beat this bush. And so we need to move on. And if we cannot reach an agreement that this agreement we had from last meeting is a workable agreement, and you think we need more than one forum, based on what Kathy has already said, there are financial constraints to having one forum, then how much time do you think you need within this one forum to cover the topics in which Ann has outlined? I mean, that's the simple question right there.
That is the simple question that was on the table, and I think Rebecca and Anna and Marilyn have said that they're not, having had their caucus, they're not sure that they're at a place of answering that question. They think they may need to take a step back and look at this further.
Well, then I would like to move, excuse me, Barbara, I would like to move then we adjourn this meeting, and they have an opportunity to further think about this, and we reschedule another meeting at a later date, when in fact they can come up with their agreement of what they would like to see happen. I, for one, think, from my point of view, that if you drag this out too long, people lose interest, they won't come to 2 meetings, they won't pay attention. You'll have the same people that show up to every city council meeting and every planning board meeting. And I thought this was supposed to be attractive to the general public, to educate them, not to create a political position within the framework of the planning board. We already know what that political position is. So I, for one, make a motion that we end this meeting and allow them an opportunity to decide what they want to present to this committee as something that they find a workable program.
And as part of that, if I could just, you're also saying that you would end this meeting and agree to meet again.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So,
Give them an
I
before we
find
move
that
forward,
ironic. No, I find it ironic, given that we've sat here and listened to a blanket statement that we won't hear from anybody who's not from Alameda. We won't hear from this one from Market College, and we won't hear from this one in Helen's House, and we won't hear from this one.
Helen's House lives here, she can talk.
No, recommended.
I didn't say you couldn't hear from them.
And so suddenly we're trying to keep from having a forum. We wanted this to be as educational as possible. I'm still scratching my head trying to figure out why did we solicit, and Kathy had to go through the whole process of getting the emails and putting them together, or your staff in a list and submitting them to us and the public.
Because that's
and
what you
we're not,
wanted.
and we're not even talking
Well,
about
I
that.
need to ask for all of your forbearance and to apologize.
Well, I didn't raise
I'm
my
sorry,
hand,
Barbara,
and
yes,
she had not raised her
Barbara, I
hand.
know, and several hands are up right now. I just want to say, as your facilitator, and I feel like I'm failing certainly at this point. I did think that all of you had agreed to a forum that had these 3 general parts, that we were really working to wrap up part 2, that we were going to come back and talk about part 1, and we were going to obviously need to talk about part 3. No, I am quite clear at this point.
I was up for
I am quite clear at this point that we don't have that much agreement. It sounds to me like, I mean, unless the 6 of you tell me otherwise, that we really have no agreement at all about what this forum should look like. And I'm honestly not sure how to proceed. No, there was agreement, I thought, to do this. I thought that as well, Barbara, but I'm hearing from several committee members that they don't feel at this point an agreement. And I apologize for having thought we had that agreement and that we apparently don't. I'm at a loss as to how to move forward.
Okay.
I want to recognize Barbara next
I'm
to
just
Renee.
pointing out that the final part of the committee members, the ad hoc committee members, planning board ad hoc committee members will select half of the speakers, and the opponents will select the other half. Speakers will speak on issues suggested by the committee or any other relevant issues. While relevant issues have been defined by the city council, and the city council, I read those minutes too, said 1 meeting. Now, if the members of the planning board are no longer willing to agree to what was stated here, then there's no reason to try and deal with each other, because then if something happens that you don't like, you say, well, no, I want to go back and revisit that.
But you're adding.
Will you shut up? Stop interrupting me. Stop interrupting.
Barbara, please.
Well, no,
I
I will
understand.
not be interrupted
Then you-
by this person.
Then you may talk through me, and I will try and educate that, but I cannot allow you to speak to anyone in
You
that
will
tone
not
of
tell
voice.
me what I'm
Or
allowed.
I am the facilitator, and I will tell you what's allowed in this meeting. If you
Well,
would
you-
like to talk with your committee members about having me not facilitate, I'm happy to do that. But as long as I'm the facilitator, I will not allow you or any other of the 5
But
members
you didn't
here.
prevent
Yeah,
her from
Barbara,
interrupting.
please. I have the floor right now as the facilitator. I have usurped the floor because of the way you were speaking and because of the way you just really got into the personal space of Marilyn. That is not acceptable. What Marilyn did is also not acceptable. It's not acceptable to
thank you.
interrupt. It is not. But it is not acceptable for you to speak or gesture to a committee member or any other person in that way.
Well, you stopped lecturing me for 10 minutes, young man, because I was interrupted and you did not do anything about it.
I'm doing
If
something
you were
right
the great
now.
facilitator about it, you would have stopped her from interrupting me. And you didn't do it, so you didn't do your job. So I did it for you.
I apologize. I'll try and do better next time. Please continue.
Okay. If this week, we did agree, and it was reaffirmed at this meeting, that each half would select their own speakers. Now, if the planning board members are going to, quote, revisit anything we've ever decided on, then these meetings are useless. Then it goes to the planning board and then it goes to the council. There is just no point in wasting everybody's time. If they don't want to keep their agreements, keep their word, they are incapable of honoring their own word, then this meeting should be over.
Anne.
Okay.
Anne is next, and then Diane, you can.
I'm sorry. I would like to propose that we actually go back to our respective corners for another short while and talk about how we might bridge this gap, because I actually don't think I think we're just getting into this ridiculous positioning again, and I don't think that we need to be there necessarily. I think there is a question we may not be able to answer, which is what is a forum? Is that one or two? So maybe we need to just step back and say how many hours we think it might take, and set aside that question for some clarification from the city council, whether it can be split into 2 meetings so that the public can sit through and get there. So I was just proposing maybe we take 5 minutes and working.
I think a 5-minute break for the two groups to talk would be very appropriate. Is that acceptable to everyone?
From Kathy, though, can we just get clarification? Kathy, is there a set number of hours that you
No,
envision?
it's one forum. We've always talked about one forum or workshop, so that's what it is. If it's all day, or if it's
So workshops,
Is it, Kathy, is it fair to say, I mean, I'm asking this question, I guess when I've heard a forum, I think a forum happens in a single day. Or
yes,
That is,
exactly.
a forum does not extend for 2 or 3 days.
That's right.
Is that your interpretation as well?
That was also my interpretation. That was always the intent.
So.
So presumably it could start at 8 a.m. and end at midnight if someone wanted to do that, but I think that's the extreme outer limit, at least the staff understands.
I think in 2002 it was like 10 to 4 or something like that. So,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
What do you mean we have?
So the proposal is that there be a short break for the planning board members and the appellants to speak among themselves. Please, Diane.
It seems, and I'm sorry I talked over the top of you, it's just that because I like the first reading of that sentence, that the forum would discuss the advantages and constraints of Measure A as they relate to the housing element and transportation. And I hear now, what I'm hearing is the planning board is really focusing on transportation and housing. It's kind of like, I think we should get back to the forum is really supposed to be to discuss the advantages and the constraints.
Can I suggest that we do take the break as suggested and we reconvene?
Yes.
Okay, please.
I actually agree that that's kind of the point where we're differing. It's whether we structure it by saying there's a housing component and a transportation component, and then the discussion occurs within that framework, or whether we say there's a general discussion that's kind of split between people that have different positions that are talking within a general framework, and that seems where the difference is. I'm not sure I articulated that as well as I could, but
I have no idea what you said.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I don't either.
No.
take a short break and maybe the two groups can figure out if there's a way to move forward, whether it's either under the structure that was on this piece of paper or another structure. And we'll reconvene and we'll have about 40 minutes. So let's try and reconvene here at about 3:22.
Okay, you guys want to go into it? They're not willing to keep their word, they're not willing to keep their agreement, so there's no point in.
No, I actually had a motion on the table. I do have a motion on the table.
To adjourn the meeting. And,
Exactly.
And I think the reason I suggested taking the break, and Anne's suggestion was that I think she was directly responding to that, and as I understood, she was saying she might have an idea of talking with the other planning board members that would allow us to move forward.
I know, but that's just bizarre to me.
Yeah, it is. Because they agree on something, they say, oh, well, we don't want to agree to that. We've changed their minds.
I mean, it seems like it was a pretty straightforward, simple thing. It seemed to me.
Yeah. We left it around, see, they within the council direction.
You're doing it.
I mean, they talk endlessly about housing and transportation. At every planning board meeting, and the most anti-residential hospitals, they have endless about it.
Can I ask what your points are?
Go get my Paul. Paul.
He glanced at him on his blog, and
I thought you were
he
leaving.
called me a liar for saying that there had been intensive disagreement. I took there was intensive all the stuff that they
So we're going to reconvene. I think where we were before this break was that Pat had actually made a suggestion that because we might not be able to reach an agreement, or we might be moving back from an agreement that some thought we had reached, that the meeting should be adjourned. In response to that, as I understood, Ann said maybe if we take a break, that the planning board members and or the appellants could consider their positions in such a way that maybe there's something to do other than adjourn. So I think the planning board members in particular had a chance to caucus, and I'm wondering if you all have a suggestion as to how we would move forward with this kind of 1, 2, 3 part process or something else.
Can I write up there?
Please. You want a new piece of paper, or you want us to?
So, we think it perhaps, I guess our recommendation is to look something more like this, and it probably is 6 hours or so. I don't want to be held to, the minutes at this point, but just kind of give you the idea that we would start with a history of Measure A. And I think we should revisit whether that's one long meeting or two, just how much of the city council wants to be, or can we do it more effectively in two? Let's put that aside. So we had a history of Measure A, and as our understanding was about the agreement, that Woody Minor would be one speaker on that. And our understanding is also that the appellants wanted that to only go to 1992.
95 is what you noticed.
Okay. We were suggesting that perhaps it be the history of Measure A up to the present, because there's a lot of years there since then, and then also, so we've got, up to the present, and we're not saying who these people are necessarily. It also include how it's been applied in Alameda to different projects, and that includes, the different settlement agreements and lawsuits, so that everybody kind of understands that, when someone mentioned the Red Brick Building, I'd never even heard of that, and, I'm on the planning board, so I don't know what that says exactly about me, but it certainly says that maybe a lot of us don't really know the common lingo that some of the people who've been here longer know. And then we break into sort of a second part, where we're more focused on the housing element. And in that, perhaps we have about an hour and a half of sort of a panel of presenters. So everyone can live with both words. A panel of presenters, and what we might want to do is have the public give questions ahead of time that they'd like those people to respond to, and or we could also have questions submitted kind of in the meeting itself, and that those panelists kind of talk about their answers to those questions. That after that there would be perhaps about half an hour or more, maybe 45 minutes, I'm not sure, where we break out into small groups so people can talk amongst themselves more. Because there are members of the public that have asked for, some people feel more comfortable in small groups, some people like to be talked to, some people like to talk amongst themselves, and that there will ultimately be kind of a report back and an opportunity for the panel again, I'm not sure where I am on my time exactly here, again to sort of talk amongst themselves about what they've heard from the subgroups. Panel again to talk. We also, of course, want some other opportunity for public comment.
And Q&A, right? The public.
Yeah, I'm just kind of giving we'll have to talk a little bit more about the Q&A versus public comment. So anyway, we're thinking that this housing element, so I don't know whether it's public comment, Q&A, I'm sorry, we just sort of, we have 5 minutes time, so Q&A. So together this is about 3 hours. And that there be then a similar, maybe after lunch or the next day, whatever, we then have the same kind of discussion about transit and transportation. There'll be a lot about 2 hours to this and sort of be a follow-up to the work that's already been done with the WRT Solomon, and we kind of keep continuing that mode. And we also, kind of have the panel, small group, kind of reconvene, report back. And then we have more, kind of public comment. So that's the best I could do in 5 minutes with my group.
So my job is to try and find similarities and points of common ground. I think in order to do that, I at least would have questions about this. Is it okay if either I or our committee members ask questions just to clarify things?
I think it needs a lot of clarification.
Am I correct to understand that in this period, first, am I correct to understand that even though these might be different lengths of time, that they're sort of about the same format?
Yes.
You're just assuming this one takes a little less time because some work's been already done or other reasons, but they're about the same. And am I correct to understand that in this first group, this time, I think this actually has 2 parts. It would be the presentations and then followed by Q&A relative to the presentations from members of the audience. Did you say that? Is it both those things at that time, or is it just presentations, or is it just Q&A from the audience?
It actually starts with the history.
Well, I'm not asking about this part. I'm asking in this part, there are people who are presenting, there are experts of some sort that are chosen as people to sit up front and talk. And I'm asking if it includes those people just talking from a presentation, or if it includes those people answering questions from the audience, or both.
I guess what I was thinking that in the best world, we would give them questions beforehand so that they would be prepared to talk on certain topics of interest to the public in Alameda. So we would submit questions beforehand. If there was time left over, then maybe members of the public would ask additional questions. But that we try to give them the questions beforehand so that they come prepared to talk.
And in that sense, though, I understand the questions would come in advance, but in that sense, is it relatively similar to what I think we were talking about here as well?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm going to go just ask more questions. I'm just trying to clarify.
And just to clarify though, I think we also said that after the small groups came back, that there would be a chance for them to ask questions of the panelists.
hopefully. You know,
Right,
that's
that would
what-
be down here,
Right,
right? Okay. So in that sense, understanding that it repeats itself twice, am I correct to understand then that your part one is similar to this part one, and you're suggesting either having Woody expand his presentation or a second presenter, but that difference aside, you are sort of on the same part one.
Yeah.
And your part two consists of the same two parts that this had, which is, again, that there are speakers on a panel, there's a form of public input, and there's a time for questions and answers, which we've always thought of as part of this number two. So in that sense, this is a different order because it has, this had a 2A, which was speakers. And I think we had all agreed, I'll write this in orange so it's clear it's not Diane's, I think we all agreed there was a 2B, which was Q&A. And so you still have the same, you have the same number one here, you have 2A here, then you have 3 here, which is public input, and then you have 2B, which is the public comment and Q&A. You have 2B as the Q&A here. And then you've repeated that a second time. And again, I'm trying to look for points of commonality.
Well, I think-
And so in that sense, I guess I would say, I mean, clearly there are substantive differences, but we are still in a sort of thing where there's a part one, a 2A, a 2B, and a 3 in two different orders, and here a suggestion that it be done not once but twice on two different topics. Barbara?
I've been to many meetings around the point and also at PIP where the small group method was used.
Can I ask that we not get into specifics of things like small groups? I'm trying to look for big picture common ground, and we can come back to the question of whether small groups are the right way to do this thing that I'm calling number 3. But I just ask is there some hope that we're actually looking at a shared set of opinions?
No.
No?
No. Pat had a motion before on the floor about going back to council. This actually is going to dictate what is going to be said, and I don't want to be dictated about what I want to say, because the history of Measure A is totally separated from the other elements. I have no intention of talking about transportation as a standalone item. And we're definitely at an impasse, and there's no way that you're going to get consensus from me on this type of a format.
Well, Diane, I'm not asking for your consensus. I'm asking, I think it is a very substantial,
I want to revisit
it's a
Pat's
very
motion.
substantial difference to do this twice than to do it once. And I'm not trying to suggest that I think there is a big difference there, and we have to talk about whether to do it twice or do it
When there was a
once.
5-minute break, I thought it was to see if there was more consensus of agreement, and now this track has gone clear off over here now, as far as I'm concerned. And we are so polar at this point. I would like to revisit Pat's motion to take it back.
Well, I'm just going to ask, I mean, I certainly that's a last resort, but I think that will say that we're taking some big steps
Oh,
back.
don't
So-
take it to heart, it's not your fault.
Well, I just want to try at least one more time. Holding outside, I mean, I think among other things, we would have to come back to the question of whether to do it twice with two different topics, or whether to do it once. I think that the appellants would agree that during this once, it would be fine, and it's actually within the mission, to talk about both housing and transportation.
Yes.
So it's a difference whether you do it once altogether or twice, but I don't see that as necessarily insurmountable. I don't know which way you're going to end up, but you might be able to surmount that. So I guess I'm trying to say that I think that both of these have a 1, a 2A, a 2B, and a 3, and they're not that far apart, and I'm just wondering if we can take these as two ideas of ways to move forward. One of the things we have to talk about is whether to do it once or twice. Another thing is exactly who speaks on part 1. Another thing is it 2A, 3, 2B, or is it 2A, 2B, 3? Those are all questions that would have to be resolved.
We've only got another 20 minutes of this.
But maybe we could resolve those issues and others and actually get to a consensus format.
In 20 minutes?
I'm thinking we're going to need a third meeting.
We started a little late, so could we take that extra 10 minutes and make it 30 minutes?
We could try. You guys would have to really work differently than we've worked so far. If we could solve all those issues by 4:10. I'm available till 5 today if you want to stay.
But also, I
have to get to the drugstore for
Right.
some meds.
Okay, so I think the question we have right now, I mean, Pat does have a formal proposal on the floor, which is to adjourn and go back to the planning board and or council and say this committee has been unable to reach a consensus and to ask for further direction. And I think that's something you have to consider. I'm suggesting that I think if you sit down and do it either until 4:30 or so today or through a third meeting, I think you could take these two ideas and come to something that could work. I think you're actually pretty close. But Pat's got the suggestion on the floor, and I think you all have to decide what you want to do.
I wouldn't agree. I want to react on Pat's suggestion because this 5-minute break just made more distance as far as I'm concerned.
So Diane, you're saying you do think you should adjourn and go back to the council and say that you...
Definitely.
And I just want to say for the record, because I don't want that to stand by a comment, I don't think these two ideas are that far apart. And I've said that very clearly. You do. Others, what do you think? Pat,
am I
do
going
you
to be
still...
allowed to speak?
Well, I guess I want to ask Pat originally made the suggestion. Pat, do you still think that you need to adjourn and go back to the council? Or
Well,
do you
yes,
think you might bring
but there are two issues. Because they're suggesting that this be a 6-hour forum, and then or we do it in 2 separate meetings. So that, just based on that basis, we need to go back to the city council and say, the planning board members want a 6-hour forum and or 2 meetings. So, your original mission statement to us was based on a forum, so now we're talking about 2 forums.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, or 6 hours. And
Or 6 hours.
I want to say Diane's notes here have 2.5 hours before a break.
Right.
And then I'm guessing at least another hour or 2 of public
Right.
comment. So I would say that this is a 4.5-hour meeting and that's a 6-hour
Right,
meeting.
but it is
I'm not
not-
sure those are wildly different proposals.
Well, I think it becomes wildly different if you talk about having a transportation component on a different day, and you're talking about if it's 3 hours, why would you have it on a different day if it's only going to be 3 hours?
I'm not
You
sure.
see, there's
That
so
might
many
be a
issues.
place that the planning board members might compromise. Perhaps we would compromise to say these two would be brought together and done on a single day, but in this order.
Well, we didn't advocate, we said it could be.
Yeah, we
we
didn't,
said
that'd
yeah.
be after lunch.
Right.
That's what the line.
So I'm just saying, and I know I'm maybe a little overstepping my bounds as facilitator
Well,
relative to your
let me just
proposal.
finish
I don't
what-
think you're that far apart.
Well, may I finish my
Yes,
thoughts? I have concerns that if we come to some sort of agreement based on this, that the next time we come to a meeting, it's going to be changed again. I have concerns about that because I thought we had an agreement already based on that plan and that format. If we don't, and if in fact every time we come to an agreement we're going to have to revisit it, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 times, then this is a waste of everybody's time. And now, I'm a volunteer, so it doesn't matter. But you're a paid person, and so is Kathy. And why spend the money, keep having these meetings, if in fact we can't simply agree that this was a very simple task? It was, as the mission was stated, where, when, how long. It's that simple. It's turned into something else. And I agree with Diane, it's gone off the beam somewhere, when in fact we should have been able to accomplish this in 1 meeting. And I don't see it going forward in any meaningful way if we were here for another 3 hours, because it's going to be a battle on every single one of these
I
issues.
guess the only point I'd make to all of you is I believe if you go back to the city council with a report that you've been unable to reach a consensus and work together, that they're very likely to come up with some other way that this planning should move forward. I don't think the whole thing will disappear, and I think you all
Well, I
will.
don't think it should
You all will
disappear.
end up spending more time on it. So
I
I
don't
think it's
think it
just a
should
question
disappear at
of
all.
whether you want to spend more time today and perhaps even at a third meeting, or
Well,
if you want to
let
spend
me
that time.
finish saying, I don't think it should disappear at all, because I, for one, think this is very valuable for the community. But I think it's turning into something that won't be valuable.
Okay, so 2 of you really do want to go back to the council and say, we can't reach an agreement, we need to have your direction. Barbara?
Well, about time, as Marilyn will interrupt me. reason I think that this is a hopeless suggestion is that they divided housing from transportation, and you aren't aware of the politics in the city, but one of the reasons that they keep talking about wanting high density is to make, quote, transit-friendly housing. That is the constant theme of the anti-Measure A people. And that's their mantra. We have to have high density because we have to make transit-friendly housing. And so if they separate out transit and transportation as a completely separate issue, what it is giving the people who make the argument that we need high density because of it's transit-friendly, whereas I've always said for people-friendly housing. Then this emphasis on transit for another 2 hours is giving it, it's separating it from the whole issue. If we need to talk about housing and transportation together, and while I have the floor very briefly, I've sat through endless small group sessions on both Fisk and Alameda plans on Bragg for many years. What happens in these small groups is they get stacked. And in particular, the anti-Measure A people bring in a lot of people from out of town, Eve Bach and her ilk, and they are very smart, I'll give them credit, but they control the small groups. So they put enough people in each one of the small groups so they control the output. And people are getting sick of endless forums. And if you make a 6-hour forum, that will kill it. The only advantage to this one is that if you get a 3-hour forum in the morning, I know from past experience, the 2002 Measure A forum, which is Exhibit A, almost no one came back to the afternoon. So there could be part of my strategy is to say this is great because nobody would be around for the transit and transportation forum. But unfortunately, anything that the small groups and the anti-Measure A people hang in there for will end up in the housing element. And the fact that this is being tied to the housing element makes it a very dangerous forum. And so I just can't agree to this forum. I can't agree to a 6-hour forum. I'm trying to get the public to come in the first place, not just the fanatics, but we talked about lack of time. Who's going to spend 6 hours on this stuff in the summertime?
I guess what I have heard that the one in 2002 did last from about 10 to 4, and I do also see this suggestion written by Diane as having a significant amount of time after lunch. So
well, that was
that's that. I guess I'm again trying to say I don't think in terms of length that they're that different. I want to ask, one of the things I've heard from the three of you appellants.
Almost nobody came back in the afternoon.
The three appellants have pretty clearly said that a big sticking point for them is this two-partness. And I guess I'm wondering if the three planning board members, as a concession to try and keep us from giving up right now, would be willing to say, let's find a way to re-merge this and have a single session on housing and transportation that'll somehow include these same parts 2A, 2B, and 3 in some order. Because I have a sense right now that that's a pretty big sticking point for the three appellants. Ann?
I don't think I'm opposed to that. I mean, I'm willing to try that. I don't know the answer till we see what it looks like, though, and I don't want you to come back and charge that I've changed my mind. But I guess I'm not opposed to necessarily doing that. I think for me, the issue more is it long enough to really cover the topics that people want to cover, and is it clear enough when the topics are going to be covered so that they're there for that part of it and the speakers are there for that part of it. So that's, I'm more interested in the clarity than really how exactly it's tied.
May I ask a question? Did anybody sitting at this table, other than Barbara and us old farts, did anybody else go to this 2004 forum?
2002 forum?
Well, the 2002 forum.
Yeah. I think Diane went.
Yeah, nobody went to that forum that sat there. So what does that tell you? You all lived here then, did you not? Didn't everybody live here in 2002? Yeah, and you see, they're interested people. Let me finish my point. In 2002, they didn't go to the forum, and these are very well-educated people, very smart ladies, members of the community, and they didn't go. So the point of the forum is to get people to come to the forum for the educational purposes of the forum. It is not for the same people who show up to every single thing. It isn't for those people. So how do we make this attractive to the members of our community to actually show up and actually learn something about the issue? That's the point of this. We're losing track of what the point is. It isn't to solve or to settle the political issues. The political issues can be solved and settled at the ballot box. This is supposed to be an educational forum. So how do we do that, and how do we present it that makes it attractive to the community to attend? In the same way you didn't attend in 2002 and everybody else.
Okay, so
and how do we do that? And one of the ways we do that is we keep it one day, we keep it as short as possible, and the reason for the lunch break in 1 hour and public input is to give people who are only there for the educational purposes of it to have an opportunity to learn. They don't really want to put in public input. All they want is information. Those who want to come back after lunch, which will be a very small number of people, to actually quiz the speakers or so-called panel. So that's why 150 minutes is an attractive format, is because it lets you get the information out. Now, if the planning board members say that, well, they can't do it in 45 minutes, but they need an hour and a half, well, that's something to negotiate. But to talk about negotiating this in a form that I don't think anybody except the same old people are going to show up to. That's just my opinion.
So now I hear two concerns, and one of them I think we got some movement on. I think one concern I've heard is that these two parts doesn't work for the appellants, and I heard at least a couple of people from the planning board say maybe there is a way to combine this back together. I also heard a concern that a session that goes for a large number of hours, 4 or 6, that goes beyond lunch might be too long for people. That's probably a liability of both of these, but it seems like many of you would agree we need to try and address that in whatever way we can. So maybe we can look at those issues as a couple of issues and try and move forward and see if we can come to some agreement. I mean, do you all want to try and do that?
David, so I was listening.
Marilyn will be next, and then you, Diane.
I was trying to figure out where we were so far apart because I, like you, David, thought that we actually came pretty close. Here's my feeling, and by the way, I thought back about it. I was at that meeting. It was in the Kaufman Auditorium. It was on a Saturday. I wasn't paying at the time. And it was well attended, as I recall. But anyway, I think a couple of things. In terms of the time of the meeting, there are some substantive topics that need to be considered. And stop and think, people. We will have spent at least 6 hours around this table discussing the structure of the meeting. We should take at least that long talking about the substance of what this forum is being convened to accomplish. And as far as separating the transit and housing, I don't think I have a hard and fast position on that. I agree that they're related, housing, transit, density, whatnot. But we were trying to figure out a way to make it logical because some speakers would be crossover, others would have more specialties. In terms of worrying about who's coming and speaking and attending, if we were talking in terms of the First Amendment, that would be prior restraint. I think, too, we're at a point in time where we're closer to developing the base than we ever have been. I mean, next week, I think we'll hear from the master developer whether that's going to go forward. So this really is pertinent. And I also am hoping, we haven't gotten to the location yet, but I am hoping, and it's certainly been expressed, that it'll be someplace that can be televised so that it can be replayed on the public access channel, because that is another way that you broaden your audience. And so for people who can't make it on a Saturday or can't make it on a Thursday or whatever, you can let them play it back at their convenience or through the library or some way that is publicly accessible. So I really do think we're making some progress. But again, I feel like taken a long time to even get an agreement to sit down and discuss this. Let's give it a fair shake.
So, if with your permission, it's 5 of 4. I'd like to try and facilitate a discussion and see if we can at least capture some things we've agreed on.
I've got to go to
I
can say
had
that
my
you
hand up, I wanted to say something, David, for a long time.
Okay, I guess I don't have your permission to do that.
Pardon?
I asked for your permission to facilitate you in a discussion where you have agreed on, and I heard from 3 of you I don't have that
Prior to
permission.
me.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, number one, the Woody Minor part, where now they're backing off, I mean, that is history. History is past, okay? It's not up to the present date because that's a cutoff time. And you don't dictate to a historian where they're supposed to bring their talk or their presentation to. The other main thing is we are supposed to be giving presentations on the advantages and constraints of Measure A, also relating to other things, which you can weave in those subjects. We have gotten completely off the subject of the advantages and constraints of Measure A, and now we're into transportation and housing type. Nobody even knows what is going to be going out on the base. Nobody's even heard from SunCal. Well, yeah, we've talked to them, but I mean, don't know what they're going to be putting down. And I'm still, there's absolutely no way that I can go along compartmental or.
And Diane, I'm sorry, the planning board members already said that they could imagine a way to
I don't care,
combine
David,
these.
I don't care.
You don't care that they already agreed to consider the thing that you're now asking them to do?
We have gotten so off track of what we agreed to before that this is, to me, I am going to recommend, again, Pat's suggestion, to go back and get guidance because otherwise, because pretty soon I have to leave here to get a drugstore before closing.
Okay, well, it's a few minutes before 4. I've heard Pat say that she does have to leave right at 4. So I guess at this point we just have to ask ourselves whether the group wants to meet again. Kathy and I came up with several dates towards the end of July and in early August when we could reconvene, or if you want to go back to the city council with the report that you were unable to fulfill your charge. Which of those 2 things would you like to do at this point?
I'm for going back to council.
Others?
Well, I need the proposal, because
So you would like to do that as well?
Yeah, because I think it needs to be clarified exactly what our mission is, that we know exactly where we're going and what we're doing, instead of us sitting here endlessly with the